Good evening, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Noahide Input. And we are continuing this series with Rabbi Moshe Shulman, which is such an honor for him to share with us the Torah and share the sources and the message that he's bringing. I know he spent a lot of time to put this all together, and I know we were doing Tuesday nights, and he needed to do this today for Wednesday, and I'm so glad that he's still willing to share, and I know he's got some good stuff for us. So I won't delay because I know that we're a couple of minutes off our 7 o'clock time frame, but we're just moving with the rabbi because you know what? I respect and honor the sheer fact that these gentlemen have spent their lives and dedicated their lives to studying Torah, and it's such an honor that they will share it with us, and so my ears are open. So without any further ado, Rabbi Shulman, how you doing tonight? And my ears are open, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Okay, Baruch Hashem, everything's fine. I guess we're coming to the end of the first lesson, so that means we'll have a little bit of break so I can prepare the stuff for the second lesson, make it a little more organized. And I will probably be going to Israel, so we'll probably have to wait until, well, I am going to Israel, so it's going to probably
Yes, you mentioned I had a call from Jerusalem this morning, yes.
Yeah. So, I sent a message to him, yeah.
Yeah. They're looking forward to meeting you.
Oh, well. Anyways, so we're getting to the end of the first lesson. Again, remember, the first lesson is basically an overview of things that are fundamental to understand before you can even get into anything. So maybe I'll do next week a review of everything when I finish, but that's okay. The next issue that I wanted to talk about, I actually changed a little bit of the order because I realized made some mistakes in some things. So let's talk about the next issue that comes up is the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people out there, especially on the internet,
yes,
teaching different things, especially to Noahides. Remember, you come out of a non-Jewish world, so how are you going to know who is the person who knows and who's not? It's not something that, it could be expected of you. So I'm going to give you some things that are important to know. First of all, you want to find somebody. You should always keep your eyes and ears open, when you're doing that, because, after all, people came out of Christianity, most of you, if not all of you. So, you want to be, you don't want to be fooled again. And
exactly.
The internet is, after all, the internet. We know the internet that basically there's a lot of stuff out there that's not very reliable. I'm not going to speak. I'm going to not mention any name specifically. But
you're so honorable.
But it's. I mean, I've been involved with things on the internet for. I was originally the BBS's in the 1990s, the early 1990s, when I first started getting involved with people.
When the internet just debuted, I remember those days.
We weren't going to invent it, so we were just,
Okay, I was just going to say the point that you're making, especially for those that have come out of Christianity, this is the reason why I saw it right at Jerusalem. I mean, I have, I'd seen your debates with Dr. Brown when I was a Christian. I'd heard the Tovia Singer, Rabbi Skobach, and listened to a lot of these debates that have been floating around for a couple of decades. And it's just, like I say, this is why I went to Jerusalem. But as I study more and then I start to listen to a gentleman like yourself who's actually pouring out the sources, it makes it all come alive. So thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, so, I mean, there are people out there, obviously, that we can talk about. We know for sure Rabbi Schwartz, Rabbi Weiner, people that have been involved Rabbi Schwartz I met 20-something years ago in a New York conference. Okay, so that's not a guarantee that the person knows what they're talking about. So how do you know when somebody knows what's going on? First of all, you're going to hear where they talk. People who are knowledgeable, you can tell from where they talk. Their ideas are expressed in clear ways. When they're going to talk about something, you're very clear about what the person's saying, and they have the ability to explain it to you in a way that you understand it clearly. But also, you can tell that maybe you can't tell all the time when things are off the wall, but knowledge is something you can tell from somebody how much they really know. Okay. Now, it's not just knowledge of the specific area, but it's knowledge of Torah in general. when two people sit and talk together about Torah, you can tell who knows more than the other, who's a big Talmud Chacham, whatever. Pirkei Avos talks about the difference between a Chacham and a Goylem. And one of the things is the Goylem speaks before people that he doesn't know any better, and so you have to be careful. One of the signs of a Talmud Chacham, of course, is humility, recognition of limitations that they have. If you see somebody that exhibits signs of arrogance, for example, that's another thing. Somebody who when they teach you that it seems to be they're talking more about their own opinion, but don't bring from different sources, or they say a source and say, well, this is what I think it means.
Nowhere to validate.
Yeah, for example, there was a meme that came up recently. Somebody brought there were two views in the Talmud, and somebody asked what it was in the Talmud, what it meant, and he just shoots from the hip, I think is what the expression is. And if you look into the text, you see that he doesn't know what the text is. And it's very important whether whoever you're hearing from, if you have the ability or whatever, or if you hear from other rabbis that you could speak to clarify what actually is there, because even where we have disagreements, people who are scholars who know what's going on know the source of the disagreements, know where they come from, and why it's not disagreeing. But if somebody says it's, my way is right and everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about, then it seems it would be a good indication that the person does not have a good grasp of the issues. This is going to come up because the next lesson we're talking about does deal with halacha, and the sources that I follow and the gedolim that I follow came about before the Noahide movement came around. So there's certain views that they have that more modern rabbis are looking at a little bit differently, and I'll explain the reasons why they are. It's not really a big deal, but differences are common. In Jewish people, as I pointed out, there's a lot of differences. I mentioned that Rabbi Katz made a critique somewhat of some of the things that I said, which was actually very nice. Very nice that he said. It was nothing. There's some things I disagree with, but it wasn't anything. It was very respectful, which was nice. He seems to be coming around to a certain point that I'm just talking about now. The only thing he said there, which I didn't like, is he referred to like as if we're all having different religions. So he follows this way is this one religion. That's not really true. One of the things about Judaism, which is important, that I don't think, coming from a Christian background, you wouldn't really recognize or wouldn't really understand, is that while there's an orthodoxy within Judaism, within that umbrella of orthodoxy, it's a heterodoxy, meaning that we have groups of people who follow a certain way. I mean, I dress a certain way. I know the rabbi that speaks in Israel, he dresses differently than me. Rabbi Schwartz dresses differently than me. Rabbi Katz dresses differently than me. All these things are really second. They're important, extremely important for the people doing it, but it's secondary because in they're just a part of Judaism, which is say, okay, there's things, there's a place for individuality. There's a place for things.
Yeah,
of course,
expression.
I mean, I could go through numerous laws. There's somebody that goes to my shul we talked about recently. We were talking together. There's a different disagreement as to when Shabbos begins and ends, the actual timing of it. So him and I were sitting talking. He said, what's very interesting about Judaism is you hold an early Zman. If I did that, I'd be violating Shabbos. But for you, it's okay because the gedolim that you follow validly ruled that way, and that's fine for you. And I do another way, and if I didn't do it. This is something in Judaism that outside of Judaism, I don't think really recognize it. So we'll sit down and talk and argue with each other. But in the end, we come and we understand each other. We're coming.
It's not hostile.
Well, sometimes it is hostile, but the point of the matter is there's some fundamental issues behind it, and these differences are really, in the long run, overall are not, not really big. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Satmar and Lubavitch didn't get along very well, but then the Satmar Rebbe, when he goes on vacation to Palm Springs, prays in a Lubavitch shul. Okay? So, be that as this may, whatever machlokes or whatever things there are, underneath it all we'll all pray in the same minyan, because it's not that we're different. There's differences and there's disagreements. The Gemara is filled with disagreements. The Gemara tries to reconcile all the disagreements, and halacha, of course, takes. When it comes to the halacha, basically, halacha means is, well, there's disagreements, and so we have to take a stand. Which one is the one we're going to follow? Okay, and then Sephardim and Ashkenazim sometimes differ, but that's what the whole ends up being.
Can I ask a question, since you just brought up about halakha? Because I was having a debate with somebody, and just chatting one time, and there was a slight disagreement, and I brought up the point that that halakha exists to prevent the arbitrary from taking rule, tyranny. It exists to overcome.
It's different. It's much more complicated, much more different. I'll give an example. People know what the Shulchan Aruch is, but again, I mentioned to you before about the type of learning to get the halacha. When you follow that, what happens is when you pick up the Shulchan Aruch, you know exactly where it came from. Now, there is a commentary on the side which actually tells you where everything comes from in history. You trace it back from the Talmud or from earlier sources, halachic sources who decide the rule, and that's what comes out. But essentially, there's a system to it, where you get from beginning to the end, from the Talmud discussions all the way to even today.
Yeah, you showed us some of the big books last week.
Yeah, but basically what it is once you've gone through all of them, then you'll see, this one rules that we actually follow this way. This one's because I lived in Ashkenaz, they had different rabbis that follow. It's complicated, but underlying, there's always this oneness that it's fine if you do differently. So when it comes to rabbis, Noahides have to realize that even when there's differences, if Rabbi X is going to say to do A, but he'll know what somebody else is saying, or when you disagree, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing that because I think it's very important. There's disagreements as to what to do, and I'll bring you the sources from where I have it from, and I'll try and explain what they're trying to understand, why I think they're wrong. Of course, I'll explain why I think they're wrong when of course I'm right, but that's besides the point. Okay. Now, besides that, you have to, of course, know somebody's agenda, where they come from. People in Lubavitch are very, very sincere about their 7 mitzvahs. They do a lot of work on it. But, of course, they have their agenda because the Rebbe told them to do it, so it's kind of different. There's some people who have sort of feeling that, these Christians coming to Judaism, it's coming, out of Christianity, and being Noahides, it has a certain thing to bring the Mashiach to come. I'm always very leery about it. I know everybody has their own thing. But you should always be careful if is that, a belief that's affecting the way they're dealing with you, or it's just something that they believe and just it has no real definite effect. Like, for example, Lubavitch says it because of the Rebbe, but, Rabbi Weiner, I've spoken to myself, he's a Lubavitcher, and, that has nothing to do with it. There are certain instances where I know in his book, in his work, he follows what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, as is custom, where the halacha might be different. But at least the majority of sources I've seen might not agree with that one. But, that's fine. It's no big deal. He's not really running it by that. It's just his way of getting halacha runs through anything that the Lubavitcher Rebbe might have said. That's for him, the halachic authority. That it's fine. Otherwise, it's no big deal. People who are competent to make decisions, it's fine. Just, we should be aware if somebody has an agenda where he's using you to forward his agenda rather than looking at you as a person yourself. That you're somewhere there to help him with his, even if he's right, but you always know about that. Anyways, that's that. Another thing is that this is very important. My firm belief is that actually, after a certain amount of time, anyone who wants to follow a Noahide path in life basically doesn't need to go a rabbi after a while. You get your basics, you know what's going on. Occasionally you might have something, but basically what it is. But you should always have a personal connection with somebody, because these things are going to come up, and somebody who would be a scholar can ask what's in certain, some things come up. But these, it's like when you get married. It's all
part of life, yes.
When you first get married, you go to a rabbi, a lot of time to ask them, what about these, what about this, what I do this. And then after a while, you've seen it 4 or 5 years, you see everything, and ask them. Okay. The last thing has to do with Noahide's teaching. This is something that is it's a very difficult thing to say. Theoretically, the answer is obviously yes. Except for when there would be questions to make a ruling on halacha, for example, where a Noahide today at least wouldn't have the background in order to do it, since we don't have. I mean, if we lived in a state of sort where the practice of dinam would be taken over in a Noahide state or something like that, probably would be different because probably places to actually train people to do that. But nowadays it's not practical. So theoretically there is Chumash, yeah. Only because there is Rashi in English. So you can look up and see, oh, this is what it really means. This is what these stories say, rather than opposed to what I listened to somebody's lecture recently, who I won't say his name, was talking to the Parsha of the week, and basically said things which, if he'd even known Rashi or anything like that, know that what he says is absolutely wrong. Exact opposite.
Yeah. I'm being very, very my own self, trying to share a bit, but I don't want to cross any lines. So I find I'm more reserved than anything.
Well,
and
as I tried
I'd love to hear more.
The difference between a Bible study and learning Torah is you learn Torah because you want to just channel from what people earlier said. Rashi said this, Ibn Ezra. You discuss different authorities who basically everything was on their fingertips. What's phenomenal to realize is that, like, for example, the rabbis in the original, what we call Rishonim, when they commentaries on the Talmud, are usually quite short, very, very specific, because these people know everything. You look at the Tosfos, the guy knew everything. Everything in the Talmud, these guys knew everything. So, it was like different. Nowadays, we're not the same, so our commentaries are a little bit longer. But
wow.
So the point I'm trying to say is, like, when you learn the Bible, you have to realize the commentaries there. Art School, of course, has a lot of commentaries that are out, and there's some that are very good. So you can look at it. Some of them are not towards the simple meaning, but it's okay. It's okay. Since you're allowed to learn Tanakh, if it's a little bit dicey, it's no big deal. But the thing is like this: when you learn, you're not learning what you think about it. Nobody cares what I think about it or you.
That's right. That's right.
No, nobody thinks about it. What we're trying to say is, what does it really mean? And this comes from people who Rashi was a person with Ruach HaKodesh, I should say, and he was a very holy person. Okay? Now, if you're not on such a level of that, then you shouldn't be teaching. The same thing, it's even worse with Kabbalah. Kabbalah says, I know somebody who teaches Kabbalah. The conditions under which to learn Kabbalah and to teach is extreme.
Right.
For example, one of the big Rebbes, Rebbe Meir from Lezhensk, he writes in his works he wrote a couple things about how, if you want to be a chassid, if you want to be a person living a spiritual life, he talks about Kabbalah, learning it, which of course is a part of the limit for some people, but he says you can only learn it when you feel that you're in a state of fear of Hashem. If you are not in that state, you're not. In another work from one of his Talmidim, he asked the question, how come it was that the students of Shabtai Tzvi, who was that false messiah who converted Islam, how was it that it was possible that they should become heretical? They go to Kabbalah, they go to all kinds of things. So he said that the thing is very simple. They didn't learn Kabbalah with holiness. And because they didn't learn the Kabbalah with this type of holiness you have to have, a certain type of spiritual purity, that brought him to that. So,
Rabbi,
it's even more.
I did have one clash with cats, and I know you don't like to bring up.
No, I
my
don't.
point
I
of
don't
the
want
matter is, I brought that point up, is that when it's all about Kabbalah and mysticism in the wrong hands, I said that becomes like witchcraft. I said they think they can conjure something up.
One second. First of all, Kabbalah is a very, very beautiful thing. It's very sublime. It's very difficult to understand. There's works you have to learn before you can even pick them up.
Right.
And you also have to lead your life in a certain type of level of holiness.
Piety, yeah.
Okay? And besides the fact, it's not necessary for your life. There's a very interesting response from the Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai was a very big, important Kabbalist and rabbi from Baghdad, Sephardic. And somebody asked him, said, listen, I don't know any of this stuff. Is Hashem going to listen to my prayers anyways? Because I don't have all these Kabbalist things. He says, you say it with everything, Hashem will put it together. Point is, it's not important. So if it's not an important thing, then, whatever. I mean, is it theoretically possible that somebody who could be a Noahide could learn it? Um, I would say no, but that's besides the point. But
Wow.
you have to. Well, it's not a discussion to have now because Kabbalah is not like learning.
I agree. I agree.
Okay, now.
We did have one question, though, online, Rabbi. Khalid said, would you suggest that Noahides find a synagogue to study in?
The problem is that most synagogues are going to be very leery from Noahides, especially because a lot of stuff goes around. I mean, you come into there and you say you're keeping Shabbos and this, or you're wearing a yarmulke or something like that, they're going to look at you funny. They won't throw you out, obviously, because we're all, nobody's going to throw you out, but you will not get the kind of reception you'd want to have. Okay?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay? The Noahide movement is very small, is very new in essence, and especially among the more conservative parts of Judaism, which makes up quite a bit of it. There is always a concern and a little, wanting to know what's going on here. You guys coming here like that? Are you Christian missionaries? Who knows? Because remember, that's a fact of reality. So, yes and no, Lubavitch is going to be very friendly. If you need a place to go to Lubavitch, they'll always let you in. But if you're going to go to I mean, like, for example, if you walked into my shul, you probably wouldn't get a very friendly greeting. First of all, we don't, everybody else speaks Yiddish anyway, so don't worry about that. But even though everybody knows English, still, it's the Noahide movement has not received the type of acceptance yet that it has the potential to receive. And I mean, there are some problems that I see that it'll take for a while. There's certain groups that will be much more accepting of it because there are certain political backgrounds, political things. But as far as those who don't share those kinds of things, it's going to be much slower. And many of the issues that we have, with the Ger people, obviously one example of them. So that's basically, I mean, you want to have a rabbi basically who's going to do it. I mean, if you read, for example, there's a number of books out there. If you read Divine Code, you read in English from Rabbi Schwartz. I understand his book that I have in Hebrew was actually translated into English, which I didn't know about.
Rabbi Shirky's new book.
Rabbi Shirky's new book but that's not really out there. It's not out there yet, so I can't talk about something.
Another 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, but the point that I'm trying to say is that if you just read it and not try and interpret it, that's fine. And if you have a question what to do to interpret it, then you go to somebody and say, well, what is an interpretation? Because it's very difficult. There's a passage which I will bring from when we learn later on, Rabbi Schwartz's work, which is an extremely difficult passage that he writes. I know what he's trying to say, but it's written difficult, and because it's difficult to understand what he's referring to. But reading things is fine, I mean that. But actually, what we'd call teaching, like what I'm doing, that's going to be much more difficult because you have to be able to answer questions and things like that. Next, I want to talk about organizations. The fact of the matter is that in neither the Talmud nor in the rabbinic sources is there any indication of any type of an idea of an organizational structure of Noahides.
Right.
There is the concept that, maybe Dinim implies that there would be like a state that follows it. But, that implies a state in a position when Mashiach has already come or something like that. But there's no indication such a state like that would exist. Noahides are understood to be possibly individuals. But like we see now, people believe in Christianity and becoming Noahides, that kind of thing was not envisioned. And so the question is that there is no halachic basis for any kind of an organization. There's no halachic basis for coming together. There's no basis for that anywhere in halacha.
So groups.
So the question is
coalitions and stuff like that. You frown on it?
Yeah, there's no discussion about that anywhere because it's not envisioned such a thing until Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, there'll be Mashiach and there'll be everything around. So obviously, the more non-Jews coming in, so the more Noahides, it's a little different situation. The Rambam sort of indicates that in the beginning in Hilchos Meluchim, where he starts talking about the Noahide laws. But in general, that's not. So what's happening is actually, okay, now you have a lot of Noahides coming together. So organization makes sense. We all understand the reason. That's why nobody's, saying, no, you shouldn't get together like that. But from the other point of view, of course, every time you make an organization, especially, you make a religious organization, first of all, with your Christian background, I don't go into that church because of this, and then of course you have your own little churches, and so it becomes not just splitting off, but it can breed the kinds of things that actually Christianity, Protestant Christianity was, all kinds of different groups, almost like their own kind of religion. And that's definitely not what the Noahide laws are about. So what's an organization good for? First of all, it's very hard, especially in our society today, where basically society in America and Europe is fundamentally contrary to Noahide laws. So how are you going to live? How are you going to raise your family? Try and impart to them these kinds of things. If you don't,
you have to do it in the home. Yes,
you have to have some way of coming together with people in a way that is you're not making a church, not the church of the Noahide nations. Okay, what you're making is a fellowship of people like-minded. Say, how are we going to get together, be friendly? Oh, I'm not the only one in the world fighting against everything. I mean, after all, Abraham was one. That's why he was so great. But he was one against the whole world, and he was able to do it. But we're not on that level. There's no one on that level nowadays. Abraham was Abraham. That's why his descendants could have the merit from him because of the greatness. None of us are anywhere near that. So what organization is good for? Number one, if you have a number of people locally, it's good for fellowship, coming together, discussing. Maybe certain problems come up and say, we should speak to a rabbi and ask, what's the proper way for a Noahide to deal with these kinds of problems that come up? Joining together for joint activity. We're going to talk about kind of activities you should be doing. These are kind of things that, as groups of people, you can come together much more easier to do it.
Like matchmaking service that was just released.
That's a phenomenal idea. There's of course problems with that also, because I think if you have two Noahides get married, they might actually eventually decide to convert, which is not really a bad thing, as I told you. So it's like
it happens. You're always looking for a few good men.
Remember that there are basically two paths. There's a path of a non-Jew who becomes Jewish, which is really the superior path if possible. But if it's not, it's wholly within Hashem's will, that if a non-Jew follows the 7 laws and follows that path, that they will also receive a reward because of that. That is what Judaism is about. So essentially, you want an organization, but you always want to be careful that your organization is not doing two things. Number one, it's not becoming, the word is balkanized. Balkanized is because the Balkans, like every 50 miles, it's another state or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. Bosnia.
So you don't want to balkanize. You belong to this group. You don't want to have to do with anybody else. And you become so much that this group, these groups aren't like me exactly, or they go to this rabbi's. And I mean, this is remember, because remember, the bottom line is, as a Noahide, it's just you and Hashem.
Us and Hashem.
That's it.
Thank you for saying that.
Just like with Avraham Avinu, that it was just him and Hashem. There was no Jewish people. Just his family came afterwards, but it was just him. The Noahides are essentially the same thing. It's just them and Hashem. All these organizational things, it's not a church, the church of the Noahides. It's not the synagogue of the Noahides. But whatever you do, you have to realize that you don't want to do it, because eventually what happens is you might be able to do it, but in the second or third generation becomes its own religion. And that's definitely not what it is. So you have to realize, what is the purpose you get together? It's to strengthen each other, help each other along the path that, Hashem made you to do it, because you can't convert, you have no other way.
What are the safeguards that we could put up in to prevent that? Because, second and third generation, I saw this so often, and I hate to say it in Christianity, but nepotism and ruling, and then, they start changing and going down, 2-3 generations later.
I think this is something that has not been discussed by the rabbinic authorities amongst themselves to recognize it. These kinds of issues that are under. I mean, a lot of these issues don't come up because, remember, as I told you, when you're a rabbi, somebody comes up to you and says, "Listen, I have to know what to do. I took this spoon that I stirred my chicken soup with, and I put it in the milk that's on the stove. So what am I supposed to do now?" And the rabbi sits down. He says, "Okay, what can I do to allow that? What's going to be the problem? What's going to be the law? What's going to go on?" And so he'll come up with see, if he can, he can. If he can't, he can't. But he has a certain way of approaching it, rather than going back to the beginning, saying you should be doing that in the first place. You should be more careful. Do things so you shouldn't fall into that.
And that's why I ask, because it's a very important question. Because any
So-
groundwork you wouldn't want to see undone in 2 or 3 generations, and then it go down the wrong path.
So in essence, we see that rabbis are basically nowadays, all of them that I know of who are really doing serious, is basically responding to, okay, you came out of Christianity. There's certain things you need psychologically and whatever. You're not going to be able to convert because your wife, your husband, or whatever, and that McDonald's is just too good. McDonald's cheeseburger is just too good, and you can't get by without it. Whatever the reason is,
I hate to say it, Rabbi. I made homemade pizza yesterday.
I hope it was pepperoni. I hope you enjoyed it.
I was thinking of you. Sorry.
I'm going to discuss this later. This comes in with other issues about there's in Christianity has a very strong ascetic thing. And that's not part of asceticism means,
yes.
Okay? And that's not part of Judaism. That should not be part of Noahide life either. But I'll talk about that. That'll come in later on because it's an important part. The basic thing is like this. You have organizations. You have people that get together. You have the internet. We can go Facebook. Of course, there's always a problem. The more open it is, the more you can have disruptive elements of that. That's a different issue completely. But the thing is that the purpose of these kinds of getting together is not because you're trying to build an organization.
Exactly.
You're doing it because you need it for support in what you're doing. Because basically, not everybody is Abraham.
There's an island.
Not be one person against the world. So you need other people to help you. Hey, you're not really a Michiganer. It's a very normal thing what you're doing. You're a normal person, not crazy. So that's what that is. Okay. There's 2 more things I want to do. I want to discuss my approach that I'm going to be taking when I deal with all the issues, because it's going to be different from what you've seen. My approach is basically mixing together the spiritual side of the life and the halachic side. Now, coming out of Christianity, your idea of spirituality and what I mean by spirituality, you're going to find are totally different things. Mm-hmm. Okay? Totally different views of what spirituality is. It's going to come in. But again, fundamentally, the main thing is, of course, we're going to deal with laws of what you're allowed to do, what you're forbidden to, what you're allowed to do. Those things are in the middle, and that kind of things like that. I'm going to also try and include a lot of things from that part of Judaism that's called hashkafa, some kind of moralistic works. There's a number of different movements from Judaism. There's a Muslim movement,
yes,
which has a lot of things. The Hasidic movement, Kabbalistic ideas that come from that. I won't teach Kabbalah or stuff like that, but I will. There's certain ideas that come out from that, which are important to help you along
morals,
in the type of path.
Ethics, yes.
Yeah. We'll deal with some of these things. Maybe I'll get some ideas from books. Also, again, as I mentioned before, the emphasis is always going to be not just on those negative things you're not supposed to do, but trying to point out positive things in your life as a Noahide with path. What are those things that are
healthy,
that you're supposed to do that are beyond what's just written in there? There's a Tshuva from Moshe, which indicates the ideas that I'm trying to talk about with this, things that are sort of expected. We sometimes talk, the Shulchan Aruch has 4 parts to it. But sometimes we talk about what's called the 5th part of Shulchan Aruch, which involves all kinds of certain character traits and all kinds of ways of living your life. If you're trying to be a Noahide and you're basically a nasty person, and then there's obviously
there's character flaws. Yeah.
You haven't adjusted yourself to what you're supposed to be doing. So we'll deal with all the kinds of things, because basically it's like this. The end result is what we want is that Noahides should basically be able to live their lives on their own. Doing things in the world, be empowered to be by themselves, not reliant upon rabbis. Mashiach is going to come and then things will be different, whatever. There'll be a temple, a central place, but right now there's not a central place. Empower you to be the best you can in the proper life that you should be living. Now, as I said before, another thing that I'm going to do is going to be very important. We will come to places where there are significant differences. The view taken by the Rabbunim say 60, 70 years ago, before there started being the number of Christians leaving Christianity to Noahide, is essentially what we find in Moshe in his tshuvas, which many will consider much too restrictive. And I'll go into the reason what it is. But I wanted to give the examples, explain why there are differences among Rabbunim, where they come from.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I look forward to it.
Why we disagree. I'll give you the reasons what the older understandings and why the newer tries to understand what they're trying to do. Why I disagree with whatever. I told you that David Katz had a very nice discussion with Michael.
Yeah, I like Michael.
Things that fundamentally we do agree. I think he may in fact be getting towards the point of understanding something that I've been trying to say, as far as language is concerned. How a lot of these things might be from language. Just, you have a different language of discussing things. But we'll see. We're going to discuss more about it, and if he wants to interact or whatever, ask questions or whatever. I mean, there are some fundamental differences that I do have with them that I think are outside of things, but, we'll discuss it. Torah is discussed at Torah. We're only interested in that. Another point is that I would very much like people to, I'm going to try and rush because I want to try and finish before 8 o'clock.
All right, Rabbi. Yes, thank you.
Even though it'll be a little shorter, but I'm going to rush through things, and maybe I'll do a few.
We went longer last week, but we're still glad that you're sharing what you're sharing. It's good stuff.
It's also, I would like very much if people would submit questions, either the YouTube underneath or just send questions to you of issues that you specifically want. I know a lot of people have had questions about the different things in Katz's book that they have questions about, and that's fine. They can do it, and I'll discuss it from all sides, what's going on. It's important, however, that when we're discussing things, we're discussing Torah, and Torah means that sometimes some people disagree, and you have to understand how to formulate your disagreements, how you discuss, and how to try and have respect for the Torah itself. If you have respect for the Torah, then we're just arguing Torah, we're discussing in Torah. You don't have animosity. It's like if you go into a base medrash where people are running together, you see two people screaming and shouting at each other sometimes over things. You think, boy, these guys hate each other, and they've been best friends for 30 years, and that's just the way you learn. You get, if you're excited about something, but
passionate.
Get passionate, but if you recognize and remember that the main point is that you're trying to know what the truth in the Torah, what the Torah is. And if there's disagreement, you have to understand why this person disagrees from each other, what it is. And if you're learning Torah and you're discussing Torah and trying to do it, for the true reason, then these animosities don't happen. But truth of the matter is this last week or so, we've noticed that in the specific group in Facebook, but it happens other places. There have been considerable amount of arguments, but not arguments.
Our UK friend has been putting up some good blogs.
Yeah, arguments not for the sense of, well, what does the Torah really say about this? Let's discuss it, but in the sense of, of to just try and put other people down.
Right.
I mean,
pick a fight. Nobody should be picking fights.
Saying that people were keeping, for example, one of them was out there saying that people were calling themselves Noahides or really idol worshippers or other kinds of stupid things of that nature. These kinds of things. So what happens to you when you get an answer like that? First of all, it depends on who you are. In general, I would say most Noahides are just ignore it and forget it and say, listen, I'm not going to talk to you. What you say is not what the rabbis that I've taught from, and that's whatever. If you want to argue with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Number two is you have to have a good sense of humor. Someone posted something, you know what this is. Somebody asked, where do you find, where the rabbis call, Noahides? So I answered him in Hebrew. Gave it exactly how you go. First of all, because I know he can't read it anyways, and if he could, Noahide basically is a translation of B'nai Noach, just like B'nai Yehuda is Judahites. It has a D instead of a T, but whatever. That's just the way it is. It came out better. It sounded better to use a D instead of a T, but the point of the matter is, it's just a translation of Benigno in English. It's stupid. It's stupid.
Rabbi, I told one argument I'd had with cats, and I hate that, but I'd like to air this laundry to get it out so that dust settles and things calm down. I told him, I says, you're being rude and you're picking a fight. And he says, how so? I says, it's commonplace. And I mean, you're in New York, in a court of law in Western society. A lawyer cannot, or objections that call for state of mind are not permitted in courts of law here. You can't just make a random statement. Like when you tell somebody you don't understand, right? That's picking a fight from my standpoint. And yeah.
Okay, let me say my view upon that, okay? First of all, to be a teacher is very difficult.
Yes.
Okay? You have to be able to very well organize. I mean, I taught in yeshiva and I've taught for years. So that's why I can lecture from a piece of paper with just some notes. Keywords, what I want to talk about, and I can talk from there. It keeps me organized and keeps me in a way that people listening to me have a better idea what I'm trying to get across. But most people can't do it that way. Okay? It's a skill that you have to learn. So if you don't do it that way, it's a problem.
Right.
One of the biggest problems, of course, has been vocabulary. I discussed that last week, where we talked about the vocabulary in the book in the chapter from Rav Soloveitchik, Yosef Ben Chai. I wrote Od Yosef Chai because it's actually something about from the Ben Ish Chai, but that's really incorrect. I don't know why. It's a slip of the tongue. But he has a certain vocabulary that he uses, which is fine, but it's not the standard vocabulary that's been used, and I think that has caused considerable amount of confusion and arguments because of that. And I think a lot of things we clarified because there are serious differences, but you have to, if your vocabulary is different,
right,
then of course that leads to more problems, more confusion, more of a lot of different things. And I believe in plain language. What you find if you pick up a work by any Gudel, any big rabbi who's writing on it, what's going to be the language you're going to find most there? And that's the language I'm going to use. As it works out that Rav Soloveitchik used a different language, as I said last week, I actually like his language because it makes more sense and fits into more the way we really want to do things in practice. But that's not the language that we use. Okay? So even though the language we use is a little more difficult and requires a little bit more explanation, it may sometimes be more confusing. But that's what it means. And so if you're going to if somebody's going to translate for you from a different work, and it uses that language, you have to know what the language is that you read there, not the language, your unique language. So that's brought a lot of the differences, and it makes it very difficult to read what he writes because you have to translate into language because he's got a whole different vocabulary that he's using. So
wow,
it's no big deal.
Yeah, I find profound works like that seem to, they'll flourish in their time, but they don't have staying power.
That's for example, I think is a good idea for people to ask questions. He's saying this, I'm saying this, and I can translate between the two languages to understand what's going on. Because there are some things that are not fundamentally different, there are things that are fundamentally different. We can just deal with that. So anyways, when you have people arguing, the best thing is basically just, not getting involved in arguments when somebody wants to argue, because just the way you're not going to convince, you're not going to convince somebody who doesn't want to know and is not really interested in saying, okay, let me understand you and you understand me. When you got somebody who understands this thing, I know what I'm talking about. I'm the big guy and you just got to listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. You're never going to get anywhere with somebody like that. So whatever. The only thing they're useful for, as far as I'm concerned, is to use them as like a foil to show other people what the truth is, what the right way is, so they can get fooled by it. But that's other than that. Okay, that's all. I was going to talk about another issue, but I don't think it's really important.
Well, I guess from my understanding, Rabbi, I guess from what I've heard or read, an eighth of an eighth, where a person, if they're going to teach, they should stay so far away from arrogance, so far away towards the side of true piety, and when it comes to teaching, that eighth of an eighth is only permitted, where it can seem arrogant. That one little teeny sliver is only there for that purpose. Am I incorrect?
There's a number of different understandings of what the eighth of an eighth means there. Some means it means actually totally nullified. It means absolutely not there at all. That's a different story. But remember, somebody to teach on the internet, you just have to be there, and then you get people to listen to you. Doesn't mean you know what you're doing. You don't know me at all. You don't know who I am. You don't know there. Unless you meet me. When you meet me, it's a different story. But if you don't, so that's what the internet. What's one of the big problems on the internet is a lot of people out there. It's like they hang up a shingle and they write whatever, and you don't know, this guy calls himself rabbi and he might be able barely to read Hebrew, and this guy's a rabbi and he doesn't make a big deal about it. You got to know what's on there. And
I can't. I got to cross-reference everything
Okay. I guess those people who are going to listen to this year have probably already left or whatever. So
yeah, a few people. I know we're going to sit in with a different rabbi at this time. So, if we want to close it down early, I want to thank you though for sharing. There's profound stuff there.
There's actually another issue. There are actually two issues that came up. There's one that I wanted to talk about.
Well, share if you have the time. I mean,
yeah, sure. And the other one, the one is like this. There was an issue that came up about Israel this week. As most people know, the Noahide, the more really Orthodox, are not very Zionist at all. So somebody considered that to be like, how could you learn from somebody like me who's not a Zionist, whatever? So I wanted to explain a little bit of the situation, because it's a little confusing to non-Jews. It's like many things within Judaism that may be difficult. And I was trying to think, what is a good example? And I thought of like this. In the Torah itself, we have two instances where somebody talks about the Jewish people in general. The first one was Bilam, when he talks about the Jewish people, and he says, I don't see any witchcraft or any sin within the Jewish people. In Numbers in the Parsha of Bulak. The other part is in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, where Moshe is speaking to Jewish people, and he talks about how sinful they were all these years. So what's the difference here? Now with Bilam, it's very important, and a very, 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 very surprising thing that Hashem should tell him to say that. Why? Because chronologically in the Torah, this is coming not very long after the instance with Korach and his congregation, who were in open rebellion against Moshe. And yet, Hashem could tell him, listen, this is the way you do. And the reason is pretty much simply like this. The truth of the matter is the Jewish people as a whole are holy people. And those people who are non-Jewish, what Hashem's want for them is to only look at the good thing in the Jewish people and to help them and support them. Whereas amongst ourselves, we have to be very, very, very strict with ourselves. We have to look at ourselves. If we fall down, that's what you see a lot of time in the prophets where the prophets castigate the whole Jewish people. But if you read between the lines, it's not talking about everybody. It's talking about a few people. Like in the beginning of Isaiah, it talks about how wicked they are, and then he talks about people who are, robbing the poor and the weak and something like that. Well, the truth of the matter is, of course, the people who are robbing the poor and the weak are the 1%. The 99% of the people are the poor and the weak. So when Hashem is castigating, he's castigating that 1% of the people, or that percentage within that 1% of the people who are actually doing so. That's who he's talking about, the upper class people. He's not talking about everybody. But that's the way Hashem is. In order to spur people on, the Jewish people, Hashem has to speak to them that way. But from the outside, from the non-Jewish, that's where Balaam is. The Jewish people are holy. Yeah, there's that small percent for his father. That's what, and this comes up. I told you mentioned before that non-Jewish people should not get involved. There's arguments within Jewish people, disagreements about various different things.
That we should just stay away from. Yeah.
Yeah. What Hashem's want, for example, as I said, among the Haredim, the more religious Hasidim stuff, are not Zionist. They have reasons of it. Has to do with things with Jewish tradition and Talmud and stuff like that, and that's where it comes from. Also from the fact that the state itself doesn't run itself according to the Torah. It doesn't. So as a Jewish person, that's different. But as a non-Jew, it's different. In fact, there's a very famous rabbi from Satmar, Joel Teitelbaum. Yeah, I have the work he wrote here. It's very, very difficult to learn.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the name.
No. He was very much against Zionism. But himself, I heard from his nephew who lived with him when he was younger, because the story goes around that a politician came to him, and when the politician was in there, he was talking about, how much he supports Israel and stuff like that. He didn't know that this particular rabbi was anti-Zionist. So afterwards, when he left, he said, they came to him and asked him, Rabbi, why didn't you say anything about that? So listen, a non-Jew who is pro-Israel is an anti-Semite. His way of showing
a non-Jew who is
not pro-Israel is an anti-Semite. And the reason is, of course, is that except for the reasons that we have that are disagreement, which is a Torah reason, there's no reason outside of that not to be pro-Israel. Our disagreements are totally based on religious things in our Torah texts that have nothing to do with it. I have a very good friend in Israel. Those people go, anyone who goes to Israel always knows him. He has a store in the old city called Shirashim. His name is Moshe. He has him and his brother, Moshe and Dov. But Moshe is the guy who does the talking. Dov is, more quieter guy. He's a very strong Zionist. So wow. But we've been dealing with different things together. We come together, and I love him. He's a beautiful guy. So whenever we come there, when he has a chance, we go sit down in the chairs. You get something to drink, and we argue about all the sources in the Talmud and other places about Zionism. Where I say
you can see you just light up thinking about it.
Yeah, we just talk about it. But afterwards, Torah is Torah, okay, and these things non-Jews should not get involved with. Okay, the main thing is recognize that Torah is Torah, and these are different things. I just want to say something. I just want to say that because one person said you guys should listen to me because of that, but it's a total misunderstanding. I have a lot of friends in Israel who are very strongly Zionists. They know I'm not. In fact, that's the first thing I tell them. I say, listen, you should know up front. That's the way I hold, and whatever. Let's put it aside. And let's work together and do what we have to do.
So you don't see yourself ever making Aliyah to?
No, I expect to. I have 2 children living in Yerushalayim, and I expect to move there sometime. I hope to.
Well, they need more people like you over there, but we also need you here. I don't know how to
have whatever. Okay, so that's basically the main things I want to do. I think next week what I'll do is I'll just do a quick run through everything, see any questions that come up.
All right, so folks, you hear that? Write me some questions. Send me some questions. Put them on the chat box here. Send them to me on Facebook. Send them to Rabbi Shulman on Facebook or wherever. And so are you up for next Tuesday? Are we going back to Tuesday next week? 7 p.m. next Tuesday?
I just had a wedding last night I had to go to.
Yes, well, that's fine. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Any final words then, Rabbi, before we close?
No, I think we can leave it at this right now, unless there's some questions that somebody had there that they want to know about. We're just basically leaving all things in the end, what we had left over, so.
Well, then nobody's asking questions, but from me to you, I've only had a couple headbutts with a couple rabbis, and I got to be honest, the one I had dozens of people say, just stay away from them, just stay away, and I'm like, okay. And then just even having them engaged in conversation on, say, your chat room or something, other people are saying, oh, then they vacate. It's like, when does somebody's negativity, roll over or spill over on yourself, and how open do you have to be when it's not a debate, just the presence is.
Yeah, well, listen, that's what it is. It's very important to know a lot of things. Listen, I'm the same offline as I'm online. A lot of people know me. I don't know how many people are actually in your group, but a lot of the people have met me. I mean, I go to Israel when I meet people that I've known. I'm going to meet Chaim when I go to Israel.
He's looking forward to it. All I can say is...
what happens is when I go to Israel, I'm usually there for it's a total of 2 weeks I take off. I'm leaving on a Sunday and coming back on a Sunday. So it's
Well,
like 11
they're
days.
they're talking about doing a North American tour and having a conference somewhere, and so I know he's talking with a few other rabbis and even Rod Bryan and a few others. They're going to decide where they want to hold it. It might be in New York. I know Rabbi Haim's got some friends in New York, but I said, what about Atlanta? What about
New York,
Texas?
try and come at least for a little bit. Texas is because that's where a lot of people are. It's a central place for Noahide. Texas is like steaming with them.
My
But-
wife's been in Texas all week. She comes back tomorrow, so I don't know what to say.
But anyways, it's I mean, I'll be in Israel for a while. I know whenever I go to Israel, it's like this. I'm there for about 2 weeks. I have a backlog of. I'm involved in so many different issues and so many different things that I have meetings with all kinds of
Overwhelmed?
people. I almost, I don't get to rest. Shabbos, of course, I go to my family there. I stay by one of my sons, and whatever. It's
Well, it's a joy. It's got to be a joy, and I just wish you safe trips, safe travels, and more. And we thank you for everything
January.
you share with us.
I'll be in Jerusalem. I almost never leave Jerusalem once I get there.
Oh, beautiful! I'm looking for. I've been talking about going. I was going to go in February. I was talking about it, and my wife's now switched her plans for next year. She's actually going to New York. It's one of her trips.
Well, New York City is almost a little like Jerusalem.
She's never been. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been down that way. Like I said, I grew up not just above New York State, and so we used to trip down that way when I was a young man. But I want to, I have never been to Jerusalem. I've never been there, and I've got to go there soon. So I pray.
I don't know
open the
what your
opportunity.
reaction would be to it. My great-great-grandfather lived in Jerusalem.
Really?
Yeah. And that's an interesting story.
So that's like 100 years ago.
More than that. More than that.
Wow. So your family vacated there and moved
Well,
to.
no, he was in Jerusalem. What happened is he was born in Russian Poland, and there was a draft in Russia, so he fled and lived in Jerusalem. And then later they sent him, since it was from that area, they sent him out to Poland to raise money for the community there. So his daughter married my great-grandfather, and so I got a picture of him around here somewhere.
Oh, excellent.
He's still wearing there's a special garments that in Jerusalem they wear. They're different than other places.
Wow. Well, I'm going to close out the broadcast here, folks.
Yeah.
So we'll be on for next Tuesday, and Rabbi Shulman's going to go over a review of things we've talked about, some key points. And please send us some questions, and let's refresh us, because I know that even what he touched on tonight about the positive side of having communities and the negative sides, there's a lot of things that people need to have embraced intellectually going forward that I know he's spent some time studying on. So, folks, until next week, bye for now.
All right. Bye-bye.